Hello, and welcome to MoonieGuide. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. It's always wonderful to know where in the world you're joining from, sharing this quiet moment together across time zones and softly glowing screens. Now take a moment to settle in, find a comfortable place to rest, loosen your thoughts, and let the noise of the day drift away. This is your time to slow down, to breathe, to listen, and to wander gently through history. Tonight, we're traveling back to Tudor England, an age of grand monarchs and quiet courtyards, of silk gowns and stone castles, of faith and change and power that shaped a kingdom for generations. It was a time of transformation, where the old world began to fade and a new one was slowly taking form under candlelight and royal decree. So as you relax and close your eyes, let your imagination step softly through that world, through the cobbled streets, the echoes of music from courtly halls, and the timeless hum of life that once filled the heart of England. Tonight, we take a quiet journey through the age of the Tudors. As we begin our journey through Tudor England, imagine the soft gray of dawn rising over a quiet countryside. Mist clings to the thatched roofs of cottages, and a distant rooster calls from somewhere across the fields. It's the start of another day, not for kings or nobles, but for the thousands of ordinary people who made up the heartbeat of Tudor life. Farmers, bakers, weavers, merchants, servants, each one a small thread in the great tapestry of England's story. The Tudor world was shaped by class and duty. Every person knew their place, and life moved according to that rhythm. At the top stood the nobility, wealthy landowners and courtiers who lived in great manors or close to the royal court. They dined on rich meats, wore velvet and silk, and measured their worth not just by gold, but by land and titles. Their lives were full of ceremony, letters sealed with wax, guests entertained with song and feasts, and quiet whispers of politics around the firelight. Below them were the gentry, landowners who were not nobles but still respected and comfortable. They might oversee farms, serve as justices of the peace, or manage small estates. Their homes were sturdy and warm, often with gardens full of herbs and fruit trees. They kept accounts, wrote letters, and taught their children to read and write, signs of quiet dignity in an ordered world. Then came the yeomen, free farmers who owned their land. They were proud and hardworking, waking before sunrise, walking through dew-covered fields, tending to crops of wheat and barley, or caring for livestock. Their days were filled with the honest rhythm of the earth, the creak of wooden carts, the smell of hay, and the steady beat of a hoe against soil. For them, wealth was measured not in jewels, but in harvests. Below the yeomen were the laborers and peasants, men and women who worked on other people's land, often from dawn until dusk. They lived in small cottages with earthen floors and rough timber beams. Their lives were simple, sometimes harsh, but not joyless. They found comfort in family, in song, in the turning of seasons. On cold nights, they sat by the hearth, sharing bread and stories, tales passed down from long before their time. In the towns and growing cities like London, another class was rising, the merchants and tradespeople. These were the blacksmiths, tailors, coopers, and bakers. Their workshops smelled of iron, leather, and freshly baked bread. The clatter of carts echoed in narrow streets, and neighbors called to one another across open windows. Trade was booming, and with it came new ideas, new fashions, and a growing sense that the world beyond England's shores was changing fast. But no matter where one stood on the social ladder, daily life in Tudor England was shaped by routine. Morning began early. The first light of dawn meant it was time to work, to fetch water from the well, to feed the animals, to light the fire. For many, breakfast was simple, a bit of coarse bread, maybe some ale or cheese. For the poor, every crumb mattered. For the wealthy, meals were a pleasure, an opportunity to show refinement and taste. Houses varied greatly. A poor family might live in a single-room cottage with walls lined with wattle and daub, that mixture of mud, straw, and sticks. Smoke from the hearth would fill the room, curling up toward the rafters and leaving the air thick and scented with wood. A bed was shared, sometimes by several children, stuffed with straw or rushes. Candles were rare, so nights were dim and quiet, filled with the crackle of firewood and the sound of wind against the shutters. For the wealthy, Homes were larger and more ornate, paneled with oak, decorated with tapestries that kept the warmth in and the chill out. The scent of beeswax polish and herbs filled the air. Servants moved quietly through corridors, lighting candles as the evening drew near. Meals were served on silver plates, and music often drifted from a nearby chamber, the soft notes of a lute or a viol. Yet despite these differences, people shared similar values: faith, family, and hard work. Religion guided every day. Bells rang for prayer, and Sundays were sacred. Even the smallest village had its church, its heart, where weddings, baptisms, and gatherings marked the rhythm of life. Education was limited for most. Children of nobles had tutors, sons of merchants might attend grammar schools, but many learned by doing, apprenticed to a trade, following their parents' path. Girls were often taught household skills, sewing, spinning, or cooking. Though some women managed shops or helped in family businesses, work defined a person's life. A blacksmith might spend his days shaping horseshoes or tools, muscles glinting with sweat in the heat of the forge. A washerwoman bent over the river, scrubbing clothes clean against stones. Farmers sowed seeds in spring, harvested in autumn, and mended fences through winter. And in the cities, the hum of trade never stopped. Carts rolled in from the countryside, carrying grain, wool, and produce. Evenings brought a slower rhythm. The day's light faded, and people gathered indoors. For peasants, it might be a small meal: pottage, bread, and ale. For nobles, a spread of meats, pies, and sweetened treats. But across all classes, the fire was the center of life. Its glow brought warmth and comfort, its flicker a kind of company. Leisure was simple. Games like dice and cards were popular. Storytelling filled the long nights. Music was everywhere, played on flutes, violins, or simply sung by the fire. Festivals broke the monotony of the year. May Day dances, harvest feasts, and church celebrations. They were moments of joy, laughter echoing through fields, candles glowing under starry skies. And yet, life could be uncertain. Illness was common, and medicine was rudimentary. A poor harvest meant hunger. A cold winter could be deadly. Still, the Tudor people were resilient, bound by community and faith. They found beauty in small things: a warm loaf, a child's laughter, a good harvest, or a sunny day after weeks of rain. Imagine now, walking through a Tudor village at dusk. The sky is painted with soft shades of gold and gray. Smoke curls from chimneys. A dog barks somewhere far off. You pass cottages, their windows glowing faintly with firelight. The scent of stew lingers in the air. Somewhere, someone hums an old song. Further ahead, you see the manor house, tall, proud, its windows shining like stars. Inside, a noble family gathers for supper. The father speaks of trade or politics. The mother embroiders by candlelight. Servants move quietly, carrying platters of roasted meat and sweet wine. In the great hall, the fire roars, shadows dancing on the stone walls. Different lives, different worlds, yet all under the same moon, the same stars, the same passing seasons. That was Tudor England, a land of contrasts, of wealth and want, splendor and simplicity, faith and fear. As night deepens, the sounds of the village fade. Doors close. Fires burn low. A mother hums softly as her child drifts to sleep, and somewhere far away, bells from a distant chapel mark the hour. Life in Tudor England was far from easy, but it was full of rhythm, purpose, and quiet beauty. And though centuries have passed, if you listen closely enough, you can still almost hear it: the creak of a wooden cart on a dirt road, the soft laughter by the hearth, and the gentle sigh of a world long gone, but not forgotten. The year is 1485. England lies quiet after years of war, the long, weary conflict known as the Wars of the Roses. The air feels different now, still heavy with the memory of battlefields and banners, yet touched with a fragile sense of peace. Out of that silence, a new king has risen, Henry VII, the first Tudor monarch. His claim to the throne came not from overwhelming power, but from persistence, caution, and a little luck. He was not born to certain greatness, but he would spend his life carefully, almost quietly, securing it. Imagine England then, a kingdom tired from decades of uncertainty. The great noble families had been fighting one another for generations, each one vying for the crown. Fields once green had been trampled by soldiers. Manors stood empty, their lords slain or exiled. People longed for stability, for something steady to hold on to. Henry VII understood this deeply. He was not the flamboyant king his son would later become, No lavish banquets or grand gestures filled his early years as ruler. Instead, he was cautious, deliberate, a man who valued order above spectacle. Where others sought glory, Henry sought balance. His court was quiet compared to what it would one day become under his son, Henry VIII. Gone were the endless feasts and tournaments. In their place came discipline, calculation, and a new sense of structure. Yet even in that stillness, the court of Henry VII had its own quiet beauty. It was a place of candlelight and whispers, of measured conversation and thoughtful ceremony. The walls of the royal palaces, Westminster, Greenwich, Richmond, echoed with the footsteps of courtiers who learned quickly that in this new world, loyalty was everything. Henry's rise to the throne had been fragile. He had defeated Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field, ending the Plantagenet line that had ruled for centuries. But his victory was narrow, and many still doubted his right to rule. So Henry governed through care, through diplomacy, through marriage, through slow but certain consolidation of power. He married Elizabeth of York, uniting the warring houses of Lancaster and York, the red rose and the white, into a single emblem, the Tudor rose. It was both symbol and promise that peace, at last, might hold. Life at Henry VII's court was ordered and observant. The king was meticulous about finances. He kept detailed ledgers of every expense, down to the smallest coin. He strengthened the crown's income not by war, but through clever taxes, trade, and the careful management of royal lands. Gold and silver flowed not through extravagance, but through thrift. Courtiers learned that under this king, favor was earned not by charm, but by reliability. He valued quiet confidence over flattery. Those who served him were expected to act with restraint, their gestures polite, their words measured. This was not a court of indulgence, but of balance. Still, even in such restraint, there was ceremony. Every morning began with ritual, attendants helping the king dress, prayers in the royal chapel, and the morning audience, where petitions and business were heard. The sound of quills scratching against parchment filled the royal chambers. Messengers came and went, carrying letters sealed in red wax, while guards stood silently in polished armor. In the evenings, after the weight of the day's work, the court softened. Musicians played gentle tunes on lutes and recorders. Candles flickered against the wood-paneled walls, casting warm light on faces deep in thought. There were small feasts, modest compared to what would come in the next generation, but still rich with flavor and care. Roasted meats, spiced wine, and sweetened fruits would be served as courtiers murmured in quiet conversation. Henry VII's personality set the tone for his reign, reserved, intelligent, and often distant. He smiled rarely, but his presence carried weight. He had spent much of his youth in exile, in France and Brittany, living as a fugitive before returning to claim the throne. That experience shaped him. He trusted few, planned everything, and saw the world through cautious eyes. He created new systems to keep his nobles in check, a network of spies and informants discreetly reporting to the crown. He fined disloyal nobles not to destroy them, but to remind them of his power. And through this careful rule, he did what few kings before him had managed. He restored order. Trade flourished again. Ships left English ports for Spain, Italy, and the Low Countries, bringing cloth, tin, and wool, the pride of England's economy. In London, the hum of business returned. Merchants spoke of profit instead of fear. And across the countryside, farmers began to rebuild what war had taken. The king's family brought warmth to this otherwise cautious court. Elizabeth of York, gentle and graceful, was beloved by many. Her marriage was not only a political union, but also a personal partnership, one that brought genuine affection. She softened Henry's edges, bringing a sense of harmony to the royal household. Together, they had several children, including Arthur, the Prince of Wales, and Henry, the younger son who would one day wear the crown himself. In the early years, the palace was often filled with the laughter of children, their footsteps echoing through corridors where once there had been only the stern shuffle of officials. It was a rare sound in the Tudor court, a reminder that beneath the layers of caution and control, there was a family at the heart of it all. Henry VII's England was not yet the glittering world of palaces and power displays that we often picture today. It was more restrained, a kingdom rebuilding itself after chaos. The king was a man who preferred order to spectacle, and his policies reflected that. He encouraged learning, supported trade, and laid the foundations of a government that could endure. He arranged marriages for his children, not just for love, but for diplomacy, linking England to Spain, Scotland, and other powerful realms. Every move was deliberate, every decision weighed. If you were to walk through his court in the late evening, you might find the king himself working by candlelight, poring over accounts, writing letters, speaking softly with his most trusted advisors. Outside, the night would be still, broken only by the rustle of trees in the palace gardens. The scent of wax and ink would fill the room, as the king planned for a peace he hoped would outlast him. And it did. When Henry VII died in 1509, England was stable, wealthy, and ready for a new chapter. The seeds he planted, of unity, discipline, and prosperity, would give his son the strong foundation he needed to rule. But that son, young Henry, would grow into a very different kind of monarch. Where his father was cautious, the son would be bold. Where Henry VII counted coins, Henry VIII would spend them freely. And where the father ruled with restraint, the son would rule with passion and sometimes fury. Still, it all began here, in the quiet, calculating court of a king who turned a fractured kingdom into a dynasty. Imagine now, as the night deepens, that you're walking through the corridors of Richmond Palace, the king's favorite retreat. The air is cool and still. A few torches burn low, casting golden pools of light along the stone walls. Somewhere, a distant voice recites a prayer. The sounds of the day have faded, only the gentle crackle of fire and the faint rustle of silk remain. You pass a doorway and glimpse the king himself, sitting quietly, his hands folded, his gaze steady. On the table before him lie maps, letters, and the seal of England. He is thinking, as always, of the future, of the peace he's built and the legacy he hopes to leave behind. The light flickers softly, shadows move across the walls, and history turns another page. Under Henry VII, England began to breathe again, slowly, carefully, like the first calm after a long storm. And soon, a new dawn would rise, one ruled by his son, whose story we'll enter next. The year is 1491. The realm of England lies peaceful under the watchful rule of Henry VII. In the royal palaces, those quiet labyrinths of polished wood and stone, the air hums softly with the rhythm of daily life. And in one of those chambers in the royal palace at Greenwich, a baby's cry has just joined the world. It is the sound of new life, the birth of a prince. His name will be Henry, Duke of York. No one yet knows what kind of man he will become, what storms his rule will bring. But for now, he is simply the second son of the Tudor line. The first son, Prince Arthur, already holds the title of Prince of Wales. Arthur is the heir, the child destined for the crown, quiet, dutiful, gentle. His birth had been celebrated across the realm, for he represented the union of two once warring houses, York and Lancaster. He was, in every sense, the promise of peace. Henry, on the other hand, would grow up in the soft glow of that promise, a little freer, a little wilder. He was never meant to be king, at least not at first, and perhaps that freedom, that second-born liberty, shaped the confident, bold, and larger-than-life man he would later become. In those early years, Arthur and Henry's worlds were close in blood, but separate in purpose. Arthur, as heir, was raised to rule. From his earliest days, his tutors taught him Latin, theology, philosophy, and the art of diplomacy. He was a child of expectation, his every gesture observed, his every word measured. Henry's education was different, though no less rich. He was taught by some of the most brilliant minds in England, poets, theologians, and musicians. He learned Latin, French, and some Italian. He studied scripture, mathematics, and the works of the ancients. But unlike his brother, his lessons were often filled with music and sport, storytelling and laughter. His mind was sharp, but his heart was lively. Where Arthur was quiet and thoughtful, Henry was radiant, golden-haired, strong, charming, curious. He excelled in everything physical, riding, hunting, archery. He was said to be quick to laugh and full of energy, a child who drew attention wherever he went. The royal household in which they grew up was large, structured, and precise. Every prince had attendants, tutors, pages, nurses, priests. Their schedules were arranged from dawn to dusk, each hour devoted to learning, prayer, or proper courtly behavior. At dawn, They would rise to soft sunlight spilling through high windows, followed by prayers and lessons. Their meals were taken in quiet ceremony, simple but prepared with care. Midday would bring studies, music, and perhaps some time for sport in the palace courtyards. In the evenings, they might listen to readings of scripture or stories of ancient kings. Their mother, Queen Elizabeth of York, was gentle and affectionate. Her presence brought light to the court's otherwise careful discipline. She was said to have adored her children, often seen smiling softly at their games or listening fondly as they played music. Their father, Henry VII, though reserved, kept a close and watchful eye on their progress. He expected discipline and excellence, and the princes delivered it. But beneath all that structure, there was still warmth. Elizabeth's kindness softened her husband's cautious nature. Together, they gave their children a sense of both duty and love. As Arthur grew older, his destiny began to take clearer shape. He was moved to Ludlow Castle in the Welsh Marches, a tradition for princes of Wales who were expected to learn leadership away from the royal court. There, surrounded by scholars and counselors, he governed a small household as if it were a miniature kingdom. He studied not only the lessons of books, but the lessons of rule, justice, law, and diplomacy. Henry, younger and still in Greenwich, was left behind. He missed his brother deeply. Though they were separated by duty, their bond remained strong, one of affection, admiration, and brotherly warmth. At court, Henry began to flourish in his own right. He joined the royal chapel, where his musical talents were quickly noticed. He loved to sing and to play instruments, particularly the lute and organ. Music for him was more than a pastime. It was a language of feeling, a way to express what could not be spoken in the rigid formality of the royal household. His tutors wrote that young Henry was bright of countenance and bold of spirit. He was quick to learn, quicker still to speak, and loved to perform before the court. He absorbed everything around him, the art, the ceremony, the sense of grandeur that lingered in the halls of the Tudors. Meanwhile, Arthur's life was moving toward its own solemn milestone, marriage. His father, ever the strategist, arranged a powerful union for him, with Catherine of Aragon, the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. The alliance was meant to strengthen England's ties with Spain, one of the most powerful nations of the age. Catherine arrived in England in 1501 after a long voyage across the sea. The country was damp and gray that autumn, but the celebrations were magnificent. London came alive with banners, music, and cheers as the Spanish princess made her entrance. Arthur was 15. Catherine was 16. Both young, both shy, both raised for duty. Their wedding was splendid, held at St. Paul's Cathedral, lit by flickering torches and echoing with song. The union was a moment of triumph for Henry VII, proof that the Tudor dynasty was secure and recognized across Europe. But fate had other plans. Only months after their marriage, Arthur fell ill while living at Ludlow Castle. The cold air of the Welsh countryside, or perhaps some sudden fever, overtook him. He was weak for weeks, and then, quietly, he was gone. The young prince, heir to the Tudor throne, died at just 15. The news spread through England like a shadow. In the royal palace, Elizabeth of York was said to have wept until her voice broke. Henry VII, always stoic, retreated into silence. And in the quiet chambers of the palace, the young Henry, only 10 years old, suddenly became heir to the throne. The carefree second son was now the future of England. Everything changed for him after that. His studies grew more rigorous. His tutors focused now not just on music and Latin, but on statecraft, law, and the weight of kingship. He learned to read treaties, to understand the art of alliance, to think like a ruler. The boy who had once laughed freely in the palace gardens began to feel the world's expectations settle on his shoulders. Yet even as the weight grew heavier, his charm remained. Henry had inherited his mother's grace and his father's intelligence, but also something else, a sense of grandeur, a deep desire to be seen, admired, remembered. He was a prince who loved the stage, who thrived under attention, who carried himself as if destiny itself had chosen him. For a time, there was still light in the royal household. Though Arthur was gone, the younger Henry brought a spark of vitality wherever he went. He read voraciously about chivalry, about the great kings of old, about knights and legends. He dreamed of tournaments and heroism, of the glory of the crown. At 16, he was tall, athletic, handsome, the image of an ideal Renaissance prince. He could debate with scholars in Latin, then ride out and win a joust in the same afternoon. People around him began to whisper that perhaps, in losing Arthur, fate had given England a different kind of ruler, one more passionate, more vibrant, more alive. Henry VII watched his son grow, both proud and wary. He knew the boy's spirit was strong, perhaps too strong. And though he loved him, he kept him somewhat apart from politics, perhaps out of fear that the young prince might act before thinking, might dream before planning. When Elizabeth of York died in 1503, the palace dimmed once more. Her death left a quiet ache in every hall. Henry VII withdrew even further into his guarded world, and the young Henry, now 12, felt the loss keenly. His mother had been his warmth, his comfort, his light. The court became more somber after her passing, more rigid, more careful. The laughter of the young prince became rarer, his duties more defined. He was now, fully, the heir apparent, the next Tudor king. As the years passed, Henry's life became one of waiting for the throne, waiting for permission to marry, waiting to step into the destiny that had come to him by accident. When his father, Henry VII, died in 1509, the young man was 17, and as he stood before the throne for the first time, the courtiers around him whispered that England had not seen such a prince in generations. Tall, athletic, golden, and full of promise. Henry VIII began his reign not as the tyrant history would remember, but as the radiant son of a cautious father, the boy who had once laughed through the palace gardens and dreamed of being the perfect king. Now, as you drift through the soft edges of this story, imagine the contrast between these two brothers. Arthur, quiet, noble, and bound by duty. Henry, vibrant, confident, born to charm the world. History chose between them in silence. One passed too soon, the other would live to shape the destiny of a kingdom, for better and for worse. The moonlight of Tudor England falls softly now over old castles and sleeping fields. And somewhere in that glow, two brothers remain. One remembered for his promise, the other for his power. The year is 1509. The bells of London ring out in celebration. The air is alive with color, with song, with the scent of summer and possibility. England has a new king. Young, tall, broad-shouldered, and radiant with health. Henry VIII has come to the throne at only 17. He is handsome, golden, and brimming with charm. To his people, he seems almost divine, the perfect image of what a king should be. The courtiers call him the rose without a thorn, the very embodiment of youth and hope. The kingdom, weary from its father's cautious reign, opens its arms to joy once more. Feasts return. Music fills the palaces. Tournaments, pageants, dances. The court becomes a stage, and Henry, its brightest star. In those early years, he is beloved. He rides with grace, sings with passion, and speaks with warmth. He is clever, educated in theology, fluent in Latin and French, and proud of his intellect. He writes music, even composes hymns, and when he smiles, England seems to shine. He marries his brother's widow, Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish princess once wed to Prince Arthur. It is both a love match and a diplomatic bond, uniting England with Spain once again. Catherine is graceful, intelligent, and deeply devout. She loves Henry with patience and sincerity, and for many years they are happy. The early reign of Henry VIII feels like a golden age, filled with peace, prosperity, and promise. England thrives, its trade expands, its royal court glitters with splendor. Henry is not just a king, he is a symbol of a new era, a Renaissance prince, as comfortable discussing theology as he is competing in a joust. But time, as always, begins to change things. Catherine gives birth several times, but only one child survives infancy, a daughter, Mary. The king, desperate for a son to secure his legacy, begins to grow anxious. In his mind, the memory of the Wars of the Roses still lingers, the danger of a disputed succession, of a crown without a male heir. As the years pass, Catherine ages, her beauty fading, her health worn from loss and sorrow. Henry remains handsome, energetic, and restless. Whispers begin to spread through the court, of his glances toward younger women, of his impatience with the queen. And then one day, he meets Anne Boleyn. Anne is unlike anyone he has ever known. She is witty, sharp-tongued, confident. She has spent years in the French court and carries with her an air of sophistication, mystery, and charm. She does not flatter him endlessly as others do. She teases him, challenges him, makes him think. Henry is captivated. Anne refuses to become his mistress. She tells him that if he truly loves her, he must make her queen. It is a daring statement, one that sets into motion a chain of events that will change the history of England forever. Henry begins to question his marriage to Catherine. He convinces himself that it is cursed, that by marrying his brother's widow, he has defied God's will. He asks the Pope for an annulment, but the Pope, caught between political powers and bound by diplomacy, refuses. Henry's frustration grows into anger. He is a man used to getting what he wants, and this denial, this obstacle, becomes unbearable. The king's mind turns to new counsel. Among his advisors is Thomas Wolsey, the Cardinal and Lord Chancellor of England. Wolsey tries to persuade Rome to grant the annulment, but even his influence cannot sway the Pope. As the years drag on, Henry's patience snaps, Wolsey falls from favor, and Henry begins to imagine something extraordinary, a kingdom where he, not the Pope, holds spiritual authority. And so begins the greatest transformation of Henry's reign, the English Reformation. With the guidance of new ministers, most notably Thomas Cromwell and Thomas Cranmer, Henry breaks away from the Roman Catholic Church. He declares himself supreme head of the Church of England. It is an act of defiance, a declaration of independence that shakes all of Europe. The monasteries are dissolved, their wealth transferred to the crown. Priests swear loyalty not to Rome, but to Henry. The religious world of England fractures between old faith and new, and all of it begins for love, for Anne Boleyn. Anne becomes queen in 1533. Her coronation is splendid, filled with gold, song, and the cries of celebration echoing along the Thames. She soon gives birth to a child, a daughter named Elizabeth. The king is disappointed but reassures himself that a son will follow. Yet time begins to work against Anne, just as it once had against Catherine. She fails to produce a male heir. The court grows restless. Enemies whisper in corners. Henry's affections begin to drift. Anne's spirit, once her charm, now becomes her downfall. She is fiery, ambitious, outspoken, qualities admired in men but feared in women. Accusations rise against her of adultery, of witchcraft, of betrayal. Whether true or false, they seal her fate. In May 1536, Anne Boleyn is executed at the Tower of London. She dies calmly, gracefully, her final words soft and forgiving. And as the axe falls, the wind over London seems to hold its breath. Only days later, Henry marries again, to Jane Seymour, gentle and quiet, the opposite of Anne in every way. Jane brings peace back to the king's heart. She gives him what he longed for most, a son. In 1537, Prince Edward is born. Henry is overjoyed, his dream fulfilled, but joy is fleeting. Jane dies soon after childbirth, leaving the king heartbroken. For the rest of his life, he will remember her as his true love. She alone is buried beside him years later. After Jane's death, Henry is alone once more, aging, heavier, his once youthful face marked by lines of worry and pride. His leg, injured during a joust, never heals properly, leaving him in pain. But still, he reigns with might, with confidence, and with a stubborn belief in his own destiny. He marries again, Anne of Cleves, a political match arranged through diplomacy. But when he meets her in person, he is disappointed. He declares her unattractive, saying she looks nothing like her portrait. Their marriage is annulled within months. Anne, gracious and wise, accepts her fate and remains in England as the king's beloved sister. It is one of the few endings in Henry's marriages that ends peacefully. Soon after, Henry finds love again, or what he believes is love, with Catherine Howard, a young woman radiant with youth and vitality. She is lively, affectionate, and brings laughter back into his darkening world. But her past and her impulsive heart lead to her ruin. Accused of adultery, Catherine is executed in 1542 at only 19 years old. As she faces her death, she whispers that she dies the Queen of England and that she would rather die the wife of Henry than live as another man's wife. The king never fully recovers from the loss. His final wife, Catherine Parr, brings him peace in his later years. She is intelligent, calm, deeply religious. She acts as nurse, companion, and even mother figure, not just to Henry, but to his children. Through her patience, the royal family begins to heal. She restores Princess Mary and Princess Elizabeth to favor. ensuring they are recognized once more as heirs. Under Catherine Parr's care, the aging king finds a measure of gentleness again. He grows reflective, not the radiant youth he once was, but a man shaped by time, power, and loss. By the final years of his reign, Henry VIII is a different man from the prince who once charmed all of England. He is larger now, both in body and in legend. He rules with iron command, his will unchallenged. The Reformation has torn through England, leaving both freedom and division in its wake. Monasteries lie empty, their bells silent. The wealth of the church fills royal coffers, and a new class of nobles rises, loyal to the king, tied to his reforms. England itself has changed. No longer bound to Rome, it stands on its own, proud, defiant, independent. The seed of Protestant England has been planted, and though wars and struggles will follow, the course of history has shifted forever. In January of 1547, Henry VIII dies. He is 55 years old. He leaves behind 3 children, Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth, and a kingdom transformed. The man who had once been a symbol of beauty and promise now rests heavy with contradictions, both builder and destroyer, both romantic and tyrant. Yet, as history often reminds us, greatness is rarely simple. Henry's reign brought chaos, yes, but also change. He tore down the old to build something new, and through all his marriages, his decisions, his passion and pride, he reshaped England itself. Now, as you rest and let this story linger, imagine the great halls of Hampton Court, quiet at night. The torches burn low, their light dancing across tapestries of kings and queens long gone. In the silence, you can almost hear faint echoes, the laughter of a young Henry, the gentle voice of Catherine, the distant strains of courtly music. The stone walls, worn smooth by centuries, hold their secrets. And somewhere beyond time, the king still walks, restless, ambitious, forever caught between power and love. As we drift further through the story of Tudor England, the echoes of Henry VIII's reign still linger. The air feels changed, heavy with both the promise of reform and the uncertainty that follows a kingdom reshaped by one man's will. When Henry VIII passed in 1547, his son, Edward VI, took the throne. The boy was only 9 years old, far too young to carry the weight of a crown, yet old enough to know that every gaze, every decision made in his name, shaped the fragile balance of a kingdom still healing from its father's storms. Edward's England was governed largely through protectors, the Duke of Somerset first, and then the Duke of Northumberland. They ruled in his stead, steering England firmly toward Protestant reform. Under Edward, the English Reformation deepened, becoming more defined and more institutionalized. Latin prayers vanished from churches, replaced by the soft rhythm of English psalms. The Book of Common Prayer, a creation of this age, became the heart of worship. Yet beneath this religious order, quiet unrest brewed. For many, change came too swiftly, too sharply, unsettling the comfort of old traditions. The monasteries that once fed the poor had been dissolved, the paintings and altars stripped bare, and the comforting rituals of faith now replaced by unfamiliar words and simpler symbols. The people in their cottages and villages found themselves caught between loyalty to their old beliefs and fear of being branded traitors to the new. Edward himself, young and frail, was a devout Protestant. His vision, though brief, was one of purity and reform, a kingdom reborn under the new faith his father had begun. Yet his health waned rapidly, and with it, so did the Protestant cause. He was gone before reaching manhood, leaving behind not a legacy of his own making, but a kingdom trembling on the edge of yet another change. And then came Mary. Mary Tudor, Henry's eldest daughter, the child of Catherine of Aragon, ascended the throne in 1553. For the first time in English history, a woman ruled as queen in her own right. Her arrival marked a turning of the tide. The Reformation that Edward had strengthened began to unravel under Mary's fierce devotion to the old faith, the Catholic faith. Mary's reign was marked by restoration and resistance. She sought to return England to the spiritual path she believed had been broken, to restore the Pope's authority and bring back the sanctity of the Mass. To her, it was not merely religion, it was redemption, for her mother, for herself, and for her people. But history is often unkind to those who rule through conviction. As the fires of religious persecution were lit across England, fear spread. Those who refused to recant their Protestant beliefs were tried and often burned at the stake. The sight of the flames against the gray English sky left scars that outlasted Mary's short reign. To her supporters, she was a savior of the true faith. To her enemies, she became Bloody Mary, a name history carved deep into memory. Yet beyond those flames, there was a woman, deeply human, shaped by years of rejection and longing, by the shadows cast by her father's decisions. Her rule was not born of cruelty alone, but of desperation to hold together a faith and a legacy she believed divine. She faced immense pressure, a kingdom divided, a council often against her, and the haunting realization that her efforts to restore the old order could not mend what had been torn apart. Her marriage to Philip II of Spain, too, played heavily into the political landscape. It was a union meant to strengthen England's alliance with the mightiest Catholic power of Europe. But to the English people, it was a reminder of foreign influence, of an identity slipping away. Whispers spread through taverns and marketplaces. Would England be ruled by Spain? The very thought bred unease. Mary's reign was short, her dreams of a Catholic England unfulfilled. Yet her time on the throne left an indelible mark, not only for the policies she pursued, but for what she represented. She was the first true queen regnant, a woman who ruled not as a consort or regent, but as sovereign. And though history remembers her through fire and sorrow, she paved the way for the next great queen, one whose reign would redefine not only England, but the very idea of monarchy itself. As the final years of Mary's reign faded, England once again stood on the brink of transformation. The land was weary, its people divided between two faiths, its coffers strained by war and debt. And yet, the dawn was approaching. In the quiet corners of court, eyes turned toward the young Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, once cast aside, now poised to inherit a kingdom battered by turmoil but ready for renewal. The story of the Tudors was not done yet. It was only changing hands. And as we leave behind the somber reign of Mary and the brief reforming years of Edward, we drift toward an age of light, of music, of art, and exploration. The reign of a queen whose presence would echo across centuries, Elizabeth I. So take a slow, deep breath and let your mind rest in the pause between eras, between the last embers of Mary's England and the first golden rays of Elizabeth's. The world is about to change once more. Take a deep breath and let your thoughts settle. The candles burn low, the air of Tudor England thick with quiet expectation. The old Queen Mary is gone. The land she ruled, weary, torn between faiths, now turns its gaze toward a new dawn. And there, stepping into the light, is Elizabeth, Elizabeth Tudor, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, the daughter who had once been declared illegitimate, forgotten, and cast aside. And yet, here she stands, ready to inherit a kingdom, trembling between chaos and hope. Her coronation in January of 1559 was not just the crowning of a queen, it was the rebirth of a nation. The skies above London were gray, but the air pulsed with life. Bells rang from every tower. Streets bloomed with color. And in the hearts of her people, a fragile kind of joy stirred once again. Elizabeth was only 25 years old, young, cautious, and already seasoned by loss and survival. She had lived through her father's tempestuous reign, her brother's reforms, her sister's persecutions. She had learned through danger and silence that power was both a gift and a peril. And so when shook the throne, she did not rush to change everything. She listened, she waited, she chose balance over extremes, a middle path between faiths, between factions, between the old and the new. Her religious settlement, as history would call it, was not born from stubborn conviction, but from quiet wisdom. She understood that her people were tired of division, tired of fear, and so she sought peace, not by forcing belief, but by allowing breathing room for both sides. The Church of England was reaffirmed, but with gentler tones, softer edges. And perhaps in that balance, Elizabeth found the key to her reign, the ability to bend without breaking, to rule with both steel and grace. Imagine for a moment the world around her, the echo of footsteps along the stone corridors of Whitehall Palace, the flicker of torchlight reflecting on golden embroidery, courtiers bowing low, their eyes watching her every movement. This pale, red-haired queen who smiled rarely but saw everything. She ruled not from impulse, but from caution. Every word weighed, every gesture measured. And yet, Beneath that composed exterior, there was warmth, a wry humor, a spark of wit that charmed and disarmed. They called her the Virgin Queen, but her true marriage was to England itself. She once said, "I have already joined myself in marriage to a husband, namely the Kingdom of England." Her reign would come to be known as the Golden Age, an era that shimmered with poetry, with art, with discovery. But the gold was hard-won, forged in the fires of uncertainty and fear. There were threats from abroad, constant, relentless. Spain, once England's ally through Mary's marriage, now loomed as its greatest foe. Philip II, Mary's widower, watched from across the sea, viewing Elizabeth's Protestant England as both a rebellion and a challenge. The tension grew over the years, quiet at first, then louder, until it roared into history with the Spanish Armada. In 1588, the might of Spain set sail for England, vast ships, their sails dark against the stormy skies. But Elizabeth, standing before her troops at Tilbury, became something greater than a monarch that day. Clad in armor, her voice steady, she spoke not as a ruler above her people, but as one among them. "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman," she said, "but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." The wind itself seemed to answer her. Storms ravaged the Armada, scattering the Spanish fleet. The invasion failed, and England, small and defiant, stood victorious. For her people, this victory was more than military triumph. It was deliverance. For Elizabeth, it was proof that her reign, guided by patience and faith, had divine favor. But beyond the battles, there was another kind of brilliance, the flourishing of English culture. The courts of Elizabeth's reign became a cradle for art and intellect. It was the age of Shakespeare, of Marlowe, of Spenser. The language itself seemed to blossom under her rule, becoming more poetic, more alive. Plays filled the wooden stages of London. Music filled the halls. The ink of new writers shaped the voice of a nation. Elizabeth, though careful in her politics, encouraged the arts. She understood their quiet power, how stories and words could unite where swords could not. In her presence, poets praised her as the living embodiment of wisdom and beauty, and painters immortalized her in golden gowns and jeweled crowns, a vision of majesty and restraint. Yet even in her greatness, Elizabeth lived a life of solitude. She had many suitors, kings, princes, noblemen who sought her hand, but she married none. Some say it was caution, others say it was pride. Perhaps it was something deeper, an understanding that love, for her, could never be private. Her heart belonged to her throne, and her throne demanded everything. As years passed, her closest companions faded, some to death, others to betrayal. She survived plots, conspiracies, and rebellion. One of the most haunting of these was the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, Elizabeth's cousin, a queen in her own right, and a rival claim to the English throne. For nearly 2 decades, Mary had been Elizabeth's prisoner. When she was finally condemned, Elizabeth hesitated. She signed the warrant, but later claimed she never meant for it to be carried out. And yet, the deed was done. It haunted her to the end. A queen who had ruled through caution and mercy was forever marked by the death of another crowned woman. As the years slipped away, the golden glow of her youth dimmed. The courtiers who had once flattered her beauty now whispered of her age. Her dresses grew heavier, her jewels grander, as though she wore her past like armor. In the evenings, she would walk the corridors of Richmond Palace, lost in thought, the flicker of candlelight dancing across her pale face. She had ruled for nearly 45 years, longer than most of her subjects had lived. Under her, England had grown stronger, prouder, and more confident. The little island that once trembled under powerful nations had found its voice, and that voice would echo across the seas for centuries to come. When Elizabeth died in 1603, she left behind a kingdom transformed. No child succeeded her, yet her legacy became a lineage of its own. The Tudor line ended with her, but the age she created, the Elizabethan age, lived on in every book, every song, every dream of England's golden past. And in those final moments as the sun set on her reign, perhaps she found peace in knowing she had given everything she could, that she had turned her father's turbulent dynasty into something radiant, enduring, and whole. They called her Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, Good Queen Bess. But history remembers her not by her titles, but by the calm she brought after the storm. So now, as we drift away from the courts of the Tudors, From the glimmer of golden halls and the whispers of politics and power, let the story soften and fade, like the final embers of a long English evening. The world of Tudor England rests for a moment, its kings and queens at peace in memory, their stories still alive in the quiet corners of time. The air grows still, but the story does not end here. For beyond England's borders, another queen rises, one bound by blood, by faith, and by destiny. A woman whose life would intertwine with Elizabeth's in a tale of kinship and rivalry, of grace and tragedy, of crowns that could not share the same sky. Her name was Mary, Queen of Scots. And imagine the light dimming once again. The echo of Elizabeth's court fades behind you, its glittering halls, its music, its triumphs. And now, far to the north, across mist-covered hills and the quiet stretch of the Scottish lochs, another story begins. A story of beauty and brilliance, of love and loss, of a queen whose fate was written in both gold and shadow. This is the story of Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary was born in the chill of a December night, December 1542, at Linlithgow Palace in Scotland. Her birth came with both hope and heartbreak, for just a week later her father, King James, died, leaving his infant daughter as queen before she could even open her eyes to the world. Imagine it, a baby, barely 7 days old, now the ruler of a land of storms and steel. Scotland, wild and divided, filled with noble families hungry for power. A cradle and a crown, two symbols resting side by side. The winds of politics began to stir before she could even walk. Some wanted her betrothed to the English prince, Edward, to unite the two kingdoms under one faith and rule. Others resisted fiercely, wanting Scotland to remain independent, free of English control. And so when she was still a child, her fate was decided not by her will, but by the hands of men who saw her as a key, a living piece in the great game of crowns. To keep her safe from England's grasp, Mary was sent away across the cold waters of the North Sea to a foreign court to France. There she was welcomed not as an exile, but as a jewel. The French court glimmered with elegance, gold, music, laughter. And in that radiant world, Mary flourished. She was tall, graceful, her skin pale as moonlight, her eyes warm and intelligent. She learned to speak fluent French, to dance, to play music, to write poetry. She absorbed the rhythm of a cultured court, far from the rugged storms of her homeland. At just 15, she married the Dauphin of France, Francis, a delicate boy who adored her, gentle, quiet, fragile in health. When he became King Francis II, Mary was briefly Queen of France and Scotland both, a dazzling title for one so young. It seemed the world was hers, and destiny smiled. But destiny is fickle. Francis, frail and sickly, died not long after, and just like that, Mary, still barely 19, became a widow, a young queen, wrapped in black, standing in a foreign court that no longer belonged to her. The halls that had once echoed with laughter now whispered behind her back. The jewels that once adorned her felt heavy. The sunlight in France, once warm and golden, turned distant, cold. And so she returned home, to Scotland, to a land she had not seen since she was a child, a land she barely knew. But the Scotland that awaited her was not the same land that had sent her away. It had changed. Its people had changed. The Reformation had reached the north, and with it came new faith, new voices, new fire. The old Catholic ways that Mary had known in France were now challenged by Protestant reformers, led by men like John Knox, who thundered from pulpits about sin, salvation, and the place of queens. And there she stood, a Catholic queen in a Protestant land, beautiful, proud, alone. In those early years, Mary tried to rule wisely. She was tolerant, graceful, and determined to be fair. Her charm won many hearts, even those who feared her fate. But she was walking on a blade's edge. For every friend she made, she found two new enemies. And then came love, or what seemed like it. In 1565, she married Henry Stuart, known as Lord Darnley. Handsome, charming, of royal blood, he seemed the perfect match, uniting two strong claims to the English throne. But Darnley's beauty masked his arrogance, his charm, his cruelty. He wanted power, her power. And when Mary refused to yield, their marriage became a slow unraveling of trust and fear. He drank, he schemed, he grew jealous, especially of one man, David Rizzio, Mary's private secretary and friend. And then one night, the darkness came for her. In March 1566, Mary sat with her ladies in Rizzio, dining quietly in her private chambers. Suddenly, the doors burst open. Darnley, pale and furious, stormed in, followed by armed men. They dragged Rizzio from her side, as Mary, pregnant at the time, screamed for mercy. Rizzio's cries echoed through the palace as he was stabbed, over 50 times, just outside her chamber door. The blood that stained the floor that night would haunt Mary forever. She forgave Darnley publicly, but in her heart, a wall had risen between them. And within a year, Darnley himself would be dead. His house, Kirkhope Field, was blown apart in a mysterious explosion. Darnley's body was found nearby, strangled but unburned. Whispers began immediately that Mary had been part of the plot, and when, soon after, she married the man many suspected of Darnley's murder, James Hepburn, the Earl of Bothwell, those whispers became accusations. The Scottish nobles rebelled. Her people turned against her. She was forced to abdicate, to give up her crown to her infant son, James, who would one day become James VI of Scotland, and in time, James I of England. Mary fled, first to the wilds of Scotland, and then seeking refuge, she crossed the border into England, trusting that her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I, would offer her safety. But safety did not come. Elizabeth saw not a weary queen seeking shelter, but a rival, for Mary had a claim to the English throne, and in the eyes of many Catholics, she was the rightful heir. So instead of sanctuary, Elizabeth gave her walls, and locks, and guards. Mary became a prisoner, first in castles, then in manors, moved from one cold chamber to another for nearly 19 years. 19 years of waiting, of writing, of praying, of hoping that somehow she would be free again. Through letters, she tried to plead her innocence, to remind Elizabeth that they were both queens, both women burdened by crowns. But trust between them never bloomed, only suspicion and silence. As time passed, new plots began to swirl, some real, some imagined. Catholics across Europe dreamed of freeing Mary, of replacing Elizabeth with her. And when one such plot, the Babington plot, was uncovered, Mary's name was written among the conspirators. Historians still debate how much she truly knew, but in the eyes of Elizabeth's council, it no longer mattered. The risk was too great. The order was given. It was a cold February morning, February 8, 1587, when Mary, Queen of Scots, was led to her death at Fotheringhay Castle. She walked with grace, wearing a gown of deep crimson beneath her cloak, the color of martyrdom. Her head was held high, her steps slow and sure. She spoke calmly, forgiving her executioner, and prayed for her cousin Elizabeth, for Scotland, for the world she would soon leave behind. When the axe fell, it did not strike cleanly at first. But even in that, she met her end with quiet strength. The crowd wept, some crossed themselves, and somewhere in England, the news reached Elizabeth, who locked herself away for days, unable to speak. Perhaps she felt relief, perhaps sorrow, perhaps both. Mary's death did not end her story, for her blood quite literally shaped the course of England's future. Her son, James VI of Scotland, would one day inherit the English throne after Elizabeth's death, uniting the two crowns that had once been torn apart by rivalry and religion. In the end, the daughter of Henry VIII and the daughter of James V, the two cousins divided by fear and fate, were joined not by friendship, but by legacy. The Tudor rose and the Scottish thistle woven together at last. And now, as the candle burns low again, imagine Mary not in chains, not in darkness, but as she once was, a young queen, riding through the highlands, her laughter caught in the wind, her crown glinting beneath the pale northern sun. She was flawed, she was human, she was perhaps too passionate for the world she ruled. But her story endures, a tale of courage, love, and the fragile, perilous dance between power and destiny. Her name echoes softly through the centuries, Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, and her spirit even now seems to linger among the misty hills, in the ruins of old castles, in the hush of twilight when history feels close enough to touch. The candle flickers once more, and as its light fades, we return to the great tapestry of Tudor England. We've seen ambition and faith, fire and grace, and now in our next section, we turn to what all these stories have left behind, to the faiths themselves, to the great religious tides that swept through the Tudor age, from Henry's break with Rome to Edward's reforms to Mary's persecutions and Elizabeth's delicate balance. Each monarch left a mark on the soul of England, and through them, the nation's heart learned how to break and how to heal again. Take a slow breath and imagine the air of Tudor England once again. The fires have quieted from the battles of Mary and Elizabeth, and yet if you listen closely, you can still hear the faint echoes of prayer, some whispered in Latin, others spoken in English. The sound of belief, the rhythm of faith, the story of a nation learning to pray in new ways. This is the story of how England's soul changed, not in a single day, nor even a single reign, but over a century of kings and queens, each carrying a torch that burned with both conviction and fear. Religion in Tudor England was not merely a matter of the spirit. It was the pulse of politics, the map of loyalty, the thread that tied or tore apart families, kingdoms, and hearts. Before Henry VIII's rule, England was firmly Catholic, a part of the great body of Christendom under the Pope in Rome. Church bells marked every hour of life. The people attended Mass, confessed to priests, and believed salvation flowed through holy rites and sacred orders. The monasteries, vast and rich, stood like guardians across the countryside, centers of learning, charity, and devotion. Pilgrims came from all corners of the realm to kneel before relics, to touch the bones of saints, to seek miracles. The church was the center of life, and the Pope its earthly father. But change was coming, and it would come not from the Pope, but from a king. When Henry VIII took the throne in 1509, England's faith was strong, old, and deeply woven into the land. Henry himself was a devoted Catholic, learned, pious, and even honored by the Pope as defender of the faith for writing against the growing Protestant ideas that were spreading across Europe. Those ideas, the Reformation led by men like Martin Luther in Germany, had begun to question the authority of Rome, challenging indulgences, priestly power, and the belief that salvation could be earned by works or wealth. But Henry at first was not among the rebels. He stood firmly with Rome until desire and politics intertwined. When his marriage to Catherine of Aragon failed to produce a surviving son, Henry's longing for an heir grew desperate. He sought an annulment, a release from his marriage, but the Pope refused, partly because Catherine was the aunt of the powerful Emperor Charles V. And so, in that single refusal, a centuries-old bond began to break. What followed was one of the most extraordinary turns in English history. Henry, in seeking control of his own destiny, took control of the church itself. Piece by piece, step by step, the cords that tied England to Rome were cut. First came the Act and Restraint of Appeals, forbidding subjects from appealing to the Pope. Then in 1534 came the Great Declaration, the Act of Supremacy, proclaiming Henry as the supreme head of the Church of England. It was both daring and dangerous, a king's assertion not only of authority, but of divinity in governance. The Pope's word no longer bound England. The king's word did. At first, the changes seemed mostly political. To many ordinary people, their faith, their prayers, their rituals remained the same. They still went to Mass. They still lit candles for the dead. The shift felt distant, more a matter of law than of soul. But soon, the effects deepened. The monasteries, those ancient havens of prayer and charity, were dissolved. Henry ordered their lands seized, their treasures confiscated, their monks and nuns cast out. Over 800 monasteries vanished in just a few years, their stones used to build manors, their libraries scattered, their bells melted into silence. The wealth that once belonged to the church flowed instead to the crown and the noble families loyal to it. Some saw it as reform, a cleansing of corruption, a return to simpler faith. Others saw it as desecration, a tearing down of the sacred. England quietly, painfully, was split in two. And yet, for all his rebellion, Henry remained at heart a Catholic man. His new church not Protestant in belief, but Catholic in ritual, only without the Pope. He rejected Lutheran doctrines. He defended the Mass, the sacraments, confession, and clerical celibacy. The Church of England was not born as Protestant. It was born as a Catholic church without Rome. But the Reformation's door had been opened, and once opened, it could not be shut. When Henry died in 1547, his son Edward VI ascended the throne, a boy of just 9 years old, and under Edward, guided by Protestant advisors, England turned sharply toward the new faith. Latin was replaced with English in the church services. The Book of Common Prayer was introduced, its words simple, pure, spoken in the language of the people. Priests were allowed to marry. Images and relics were destroyed, and altars were torn down and replaced by plain tables. It was a revolution of the spirit, swift and uncompromising. Many welcomed it, believing that true faith had finally come to life. Others wept, feeling their sacred traditions slip away like sand between their fingers. But Edward's reign was brief, a bright flame that burned only a few years. When he died in 1553, the pendulum of faith swung once again. Then came Mary I, Henry's eldest daughter, a devout Catholic who sought to restore the old ways, to bring England back to Rome. Her reign was one of fervor and fire. The Latin Mass returned. The monasteries were mourned, though never rebuilt. And for those who refused to renounce the Protestant faith, Mary's justice was merciless. Nearly 300 Protestants were burned at the stake, bishops, scholars, and common folk alike. Among them were Thomas Cranmer, Hugh Latimer, and Nicholas Ridley, whose deaths would be remembered for centuries. The fires of Smithfield and Oxford lit the skies, and with them, Mary earned the name history would never let her forget, Bloody Mary. And yet, even within her harshness, there was conviction. She truly believed she was saving souls, restoring England to grace. But faith, once fractured, cannot be restored by force. And when she died in 1558, her dream of a Catholic England died with her. Then came Elizabeth I, the daughter of Anne Boleyn and the last of the Tudors. Her challenge was not to choose sides, but to heal the wound her father, brother, and sister had carved into the soul of the nation. Elizabeth, cautious and clever, understood that peace could not be found in extremity. She sought balance, a middle way, a via media, between Rome and Geneva, between ritual and reform. In 1559, she reintroduced the Act of Supremacy, declaring herself once again head of the Church of England, but this time with a gentler tone, Supreme Governor, not head, a title that left space for God above her. She also established the Act of Uniformity, restoring the Book of Common Prayer, but allowing, in its words, a careful ambiguity, phrases that could comfort both Protestant and Catholic hearts. The Mass was now the communion service, but the bread and wine, the music and beauty remained. The faith of England had found its shape, neither Rome nor Geneva, but something uniquely its own. Still, peace was fragile. Catholics saw Elizabeth as illegitimate, her mother Anne Boleyn's marriage never recognized by Rome. They whispered of another rightful heir, her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots. And so, faith once again intertwined with fear, and politics with prophecy. Across England, secret masses were held in hidden chambers. Priests traveled in disguise. Families risked their lives to shelter them. The Protestant government, wary of plots, hunted them down. And in time, with the execution of Mary Stuart, the Catholic cause seemed to wither. By the end of Elizabeth's reign, the Church of England was the Church of the land. And though dissent remained, the fires had dimmed. A weary peace settled over the kingdom, fragile, imperfect, but real. In those 60 years of Tudor rule, England's faith had been torn apart and rewoven, like a tapestry unpicked and stitched anew. From Latin to English, from altar to table, from pope to king, and finally to something that was both old and new. It was a century of struggle, of martyrs and monarchs, of prayers in secret, and sermons in sunlight. It was also a century of awakening. The Bible was now in every home. People could read the words themselves, not through the priest, but through their own eyes and hearts. Faith had become personal, intimate, human. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear it, the faint sound of psalms drifting through a Tudor village, the call of bells from a parish church, the rustle of pages as someone reads by candlelight. England had found a new way to believe, one shaped by trial, tragedy, and transformation. The Tudor monarchs did not simply change laws, they reshaped the very language of the sacred. They made faith a part of English identity, woven into its art, its poetry, its conscience. And though blood was spilled and hearts were broken, something enduring emerged, a faith both strong and quiet, a compromise that would outlast even the Tudors themselves. And so, as the candle burns low once more, imagine the gentle turning of pages, the English Bible open on a wooden table, its words glowing in the soft light. Imagine a family kneeling together, their voices whispering prayers that once were forbidden. Imagine a country learning to breathe again, to live with difference, to find beauty even in division. This was the soul of Tudor England, torn and mended, broken and made whole again by kings and queens who sought both power and salvation. Their choices still echo in every church steeple, in every hymn, in the quiet way England learned to pray. And now, as we leave the age of the Tudors behind, the echoes of history begin to fade. The grand halls fall silent, the torches burn low, and the moonlight drifts softly across the quiet earth. You've wandered through centuries tonight, through the courts of kings and queens, through whispers of power and the gentle hum of life in another time. Now, everything grows still. The weight of time softens, and the world outside fades to a calm and distant hush. Let the night cradle you. Let your thoughts drift slow and unhurried, like a candle flickering out in a quiet chapel. The story rests now, and so can you. And before you drift completely into dreams, don't forget to subscribe to MoonieGuide so you can return to more peaceful journeys through history, time, and imagination. The moon watches quietly above, and all is well. This is MoonieGuide. Good night.